Don't risk being next. That's the message U.S. President Donald Trump is sending to North Korea, pivoting off what the White House considers a successful strike in Syria. With growing signs that North Korea may be preparing for a sixth nuclear test, the American leader has spoken with his South Korean and Japanese counterparts, and his senior officials are making poignant note of a full range of options available to counter any threat to the U.S. or its allies. North Korea's nuclear threat as we near key dates for the rogue state. Will there be Washington-Beijing cooperation to rein in that threat? And what about the role of South Korea in this equation? The topic of our talks on Peninsula 24 today. Let's get these discussions rolling. Now, the sudden flurry of action centering on North Korea comes on the heels of a U.S.-China summit, a first for Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. As you can see now, joining me now is Dr. Chang-soo to my left, Research Fellow Emeritus at Korea Institute for Defense Analyses. Thank you so much for joining us.
Many thanks for having me this morning. Thank you.
And of course, to my right, John Delury, Associate Professor of Chinese Studies at the Graduate School of International Studies at Yonsei University. Thank you so much for coming on air. Now, first of all, I want to start with your brief impression of the U.S.-China summit. I want to start with you, Dr. Kim.
According to many American experts, their general comment was there's no specific deliverable at the summit. But I think it was a moderate success because this is the first encounter between two leaders, and particularly from the respect that they will share the concern about the North Korean threat. In that sense, as for South Koreans, I think it was a modest success.
So modest success is your assessment. What about you, John?
Well, I think the optics were good for both sides. China wanted a great power handshake, and they more or less got that, I think. And the surprise, of course, had nothing to do really with U.S.-China relations. That was the sudden missile strike on Syria. So that was a bit of a curveball. But again, that didn't directly bear so much on the relationship. So I think Beijing's probably happy overall. There were no big surprises directly. And I would say it really affirmed status quo in U.S.-China relations. I would agree there were no specific outcomes on the top issues of trade in North Korea. And it will also be seen, I think, in China as normalizing the relationship. Again, the Chinese would like that.
Right. So a modest success, like Dr. Kim said. Now, for some more details of the U.S.-China summit, why don't we link up with a White House correspondent who actually was there covering the story at Mar-a-Lago. Steve Herman, White House correspondent at VOA News, is joining us right now via Skype. Now, Steve, you were in Mar-a-Lago yourself, traveling with the Presidential Press Corps. Give us a brief wrap-up of the kind of topics that was discussed there and the ambience there.
Yes, Jen, it was a very fascinating time to be in the room with these leaders because, as we would later find out, just shortly after the dinner concluded between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, that the president had ordered the strike on Syria, Tomahawk missiles being dropped on that airfield in Syria where the planes took off that allegedly dropped sarin nerve gas on civilians in rebel-held territories. And the fact that this was done while Xi Jinping was with the president, and President Xi apparently being informed at the end of the dinner or shortly thereafter, there's conflicting information from administration officials about that, I think was not only a message to Syria in the Middle East, Iran, and Russia, but also to China and North Korea, that look, we can do this, we're willing to do this, and we can certainly do this to North Korea as well.
So definitely a message to North Korea there. Now, Steve, as the two superpowers wrapped up their 21-hour-long meeting, we also heard of Washington actually diverting a U.S. aircraft carrier strike force nearby Singapore, north towards the Korean Peninsula. How is that move being assessed there in Washington?
President Trump made it clear that, look, if you can't rein in Kim Jong-un, then, we're going to have to take some action here. Now, I don't think many of the North Korea watchers here are expecting that there's going to be some preemptive strike on either Simpo or the nuclear test facility, but that if something happens, obviously this ratchets up the tension on the Korean Peninsula and it is a major move by the United States early in the Trump administration, and now squarely puts the next move into the court of Pyongyang.
Steve Herman, White House Bureau Chief for VOA News, reporting for us from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Steve, for that.
My pleasure, Jen.
Would you agree with him that in the sense that it was a strong message towards North Korea that Donald Trump and Xi Jinping were sending from Mar-a-Lago?
Yeah, I totally agree with Steve because it sent a strong message to not only to Syria, but to Russia, but also North Korea and China. Because Syria is a totally different question. It's a terrorist-related issue, but North Korea as a state, because they continue to do this kind of military exercises, and also on their own part, and also nuclear and missile development, and which continue to pose a serious threat not only to South Korea, but the United States, also increasingly to Japan, China as well. So this is a very strong message for North Korea and China, who is behind North Korea. I think this message has been gotten pretty well by Pyongyang and also Beijing as well. Okay, this is my interpretation.
What about your assessment? I mean, from the perspective of China, would you agree that China was actually in this? So China's full participation or commitment was in this, in the U.S.-China summit, in terms of reining in North Korean threats?
No, I'm afraid I wouldn't see it that way. I do think that it makes China look weak to some extent, you know, and if there's going to be one backlash against this summit back in China, it will be, to some extent, Xi Jinping is emasculated when Trump, you know, presses the button, fires missiles off, and then comes back to dinner. So I said there's the great power handshake, but the missile strike doesn't exactly fit the narrative. When you throw North Korea into the mix, and I agree, I mean, with Steve and Dr. Kim, that the administration has made that explicit, you know, that this is a message. I think it's a lot more complicated than now Pyongyang has a clear message about what the Trump administration is going to do. Because even if we just look at Syria, we still don't know what they're going to do with Syria. What we know now is this is a president who is able to suddenly reverse himself and take military action without a real clear strategic plan or path forward. So, you know, that's actually potentially a very dangerous sort of approach. There's a capriciousness to what he did in Syria. I agree with Dr. Kim that North Koreans will be taking that, you know, they're building their profile of this guy. They're sizing up Donald Trump.
Right.
And I think they're now going to say, okay, he's not just completely bluffing when he says, I might lob some missiles into your country. But he also could suddenly do that without coordination, and we'll talk about South Korea, without necessarily letting South Korea know, and without a clear path forward. So I don't think that North Korea policy is clear yet. And I don't think that this sent a strong message to North Korea or China, you better rein it in or else.
Dr. Kim, I wonder what is running through the mind of Kim Jong-un as he watches this U.S.-China summit unfold and as he watches U.S. airstrikes in Syria.
You know, nobody knows for sure what is going on, what is running in his mind per se, but I think we all the spectators, Korea watchers, North Korea watchers rather in Korea, if past history is any guide to us, this is the way that his predecessor, his father and his grandfather behaved when there was a United States, you know, strategic assets are deployed into in or out of South Korea and the Peninsula. They're really alarmed, and they actually went out of view for several days, and they remained silent without making any, you know, further provocations. This is their tactic. They actually showed that we are listening to you, and we are also concerned about your reactions. So don't try to invoke any further. We know you're coming. That's the message. So there's all kinds of indication North Korea has been very silent because we have all kind of, you know, signal intelligence reports and all kind of the frequency of the talks between the military and the leadership and all kind of indication that they were concerned and even worried about this kind of possible threat. Because the United States has been always preparing kind of scenario that they're going to deal with two major theater warfare. one in the Middle East, one in this part of the world. So when Mr. Trump struck and he ordered a military strike in Syria, that means he may move next to the target, which is North Korea. And this is, Mr. Trump is a man, rather than just word, when he says something, he's going to translate it into his own action. So that's why North Korea got the message that Mr. Trump is something that we should be really concerned about, and we have to listen carefully about each and every single word coming out of his mouth.
So basically, he makes good on his words. That's probably the clearest message that Kim Jong-un received from this. But I want to jump back to Mar-a-Lago. We were hoping that North Korea issue would be discussed, as well as China's economic retaliation over the deployment of THAAD. We don't know whether that was discussed or not, although Donald Trump did apparently tell acting president of this country, Hwang Kyo-won, over the phone that it was addressed, but we didn't get any results.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of issue where you'd like to hear that coming out somehow from Trump or from the administration. Of course, ideally somehow implied from Xi Jinping. Whereas for Trump afterwards, to call South Korea and say, oh, yeah, of course we brought up your issue. A lot of countries have issues like that, right, that they would be looking for the United States to take the lead on with China. You don't get the sense from the optics of this summit that it was hardball and that Trump was really laying down the law with Xi Jinping. He did raise some of those expectations. Remember, he was tweeting about North Korea and about trade and said, I forget the phrase, but he said, I don't expect this to be necessarily a smooth and friendly affair. But then everything suggested it was a fairly smooth and friendly affair. So if I'm the South Korean public, I'm pretty skeptical right now that pushing back against China's response to THAAD was one of the key, issues on the plate. But of course, these things are hard to know. You have to. It's a lot of spin out there from every direction.
I want to see from a slightly different perspective, because it was a very informal meeting, and he informed of the plan to strike the Syrian targets right after as they move into the dinner. So, and that, if I were Trump, because if you look at the mood in there, doing something terrible about North Korea and striking another targets in North Korea is something you should not do that. So Mr. Trump is wide enough to look at all the situation here. And as a matter of fact, what I understand is this kind of THAAD issues, which is very important to us, should be addressed at the secretary level. Mr. Tillerson went to Beijing already, and he met with Xi Jinping and talked with his counterpart like Wang Yi, and he delivers U.S. concern about North Korean continuing threats, and also how we're going to deal with them effectively. So at the Mar-a-Lago specific summit, you have no time. You don't have. It's not a mood to talk about very specific issues because they have so many other issues. The first one being the strike in Syria. So in that sense, probably it is not that he raised his expectation or concerns or even interest in South Korea and North Korean security issues. Actually, he has a very high level of expectations about how we meaning the United States and China, should deal with North Korean threats more effectively. That concern is clear there, but look at the menu and the channel that they can go through each other. He delegated his kind of authority to his secretaries, I guess.
So all in all, however, we did get reports that Donald Trump said Xi Jinping and himself did agree or see eye to eye on the gravity, on the severity of this North Korea's nuclear threat and provocations. Now, do we expect China to ramp up its crackdown on North Korea over its North Korea's nuclear program coming out of this summit?
I don't see those indications. And if you look at the language, for example, that Secretary Tillerson used, there's some careful dancing around the words there, where the administration has said, well, President Xi agreed that it's a big concern. That's not new. I mean, the Chinese are always saying North Korea is a serious concern.
Right.
It's all a question of how do you address that concern. There is a gap between the U.S. approach and the Chinese approach. The Chinese approach is very consistent that, yeah, we will ramp up sanctions here and there through the UN multilateral, process. And so they keep stressing we are in, accordance with those dictates. But that's not going to solve the problem. You're not going to solve the problem through pressure, let alone through a military strike. And it's, you know, the Chinese are not going to believe that sending a naval strike group out really helps, certainly not in the long run. That doesn't make a difference. The Chinese perspective is very clear. Policy is very clear. You have to talk to Pyongyang. You have to use dialogue and negotiation to resolve this issue. And so, I mean, the Chinese are annoyed by Kim Jong-un. Xi Jinping is personally annoyed by Kim Jong-un.
Oh, I'm sure.
That's
yeah.
very clear.
Clear.
But the policy is also very clear. The policy is not based on sanctions, let alone even the threat of force or the use of force. It's predicated on the only way out of this is a negotiation. And, you know, I think the game here is President Xi is trying to show President Trump, we're not the problem, okay? We cut off coal. We're not the hole in your sanctions net. And okay, you can go bring your ships out there. You're not going to stop Kim Jong-un. That's not the way to do it. So I think that, you know, sometimes the Chinese do take the long game a little bit longer than the Americans. And Trump is very new to the North Korea issue. The Chinese have been dealing with it for a long time. And so I think part of what the Chinese are doing is sitting back a little and saying, okay, try that. Try sanctions. Try force or threat of force. We'll see how long it takes you to finally come around to the fact that you're a deal maker. Go make the deal. You know, I think that's still the Chinese view. I don't see changes.
Well, U.S.-China over North Korea issue. So is it concerning the absence of South Korea in this equation? Following his summit talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Donald Trump spoke on the phone with his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe. The two agreed that the two nations and South Korea must maintain unity in dealing with North Korea's, quote, pattern of provocation. That was followed by Trump's phone conversation with South Korea's acting president Hwang Kyo-won, now front and center in discussions between leaders of U.S., China, and Japan, North Korea, and the Kim Jong-un regime. So, Dr. Kim, John, would you agree that the absence of leadership in Seoul right now at this critical juncture is a big concern?
I don't think so.
No?
Because we have the same Minister of National Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs for the last 4 years. They are the ones who are really dealing with North Korean, diplomatic and security reasons. And we have the same CFC forever, for the last 4 years. And they maintain a very high level of military readiness against North Korea. And their motto, as their motto goes, they're going to fight and win tonight. So I don't see any serious problem with the lacking of this kind of top position, particularly the present par.
I think it is a serious concern. Trump is a top-down guy, but there's no top for South Korea.
He has no contact point in South Korea, basically.
That's right. And he knows, and Americans know, that acting President Hwang is an acting president. It's not a real counterpart. This is not who he's going to be dealing with. He doesn't have even real legitimacy from the electorate in South Korea. So it's a serious concern. And I would say there's one specific area. I mean, Dr. Kim is right that, if war broke out, people here would know what to do in terms of the military and its coordination with the United States. But I would assume that one of the top, if not the top priority for South Korea, every South Korean I know right now, is to make sure war does not break out, that
Correct.
we don't have to fight tonight. South Korea is that brake pad that holds back the United States to say, whoa, 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 actually, you can't just take out that missile pad, because if you do, they're going to retaliate on our capital. We're within range of their artillery. There is no South Korean leader who is calling Trump to get on the phone to say, sorry, it can't work that way.
Right.
There are constraints here. Instead, there's an acting president to pick up the phone to hear the report from Trump about what he said or didn't say with President Xi. So I do think it's something that actually the South Korean public needs to pay a lot more attention to. And I was pleased to see, I think it was over this weekend, that the candidates started to talk a little bit more. And that I saw that coming into the conversation in South Korea more about, hey, wait a second.
Right.
We have a voice here and we need to be heard. This is not a decision that President Trump makes on his own.
Well, so in less than a month from now, South Korea will have a new president, a new incoming administration. More likely a liberal one than this one. Most likely that is. How could the incoming administration best position itself to put its best foot forward in taking a more proactive role in this, in dealing with the North Korean issue, I guess, with the United States, with China, and with its neighboring countries? Dr. Kim?
It's a very difficult question because when you said a more proactive role in dealing with North Korea, this is exactly what we have been doing for the last 20, 30 years in dealing with North Korea, China, United States, South Korea. We laid out all the options on the table, but it was North Korea that really selected some of the cards and respond to those specific questions. So this taking a kind of proactive role, meaning, I think probably you mean that some gesture or proposal to have a dialogue and negotiation with North Korea to deal with all these problems, that's a possibility. But as you can imagine, all these options were available for the last 20 or 30 years. So proactive role, meaning I don't think it does not necessarily mean a kind of military strike against North Korea, because it has a huge implication for South security. And I think many Korean people, either conservative or liberals, they want the new government in Korea installed to do some more kind of active role, meaning that we have to get out of this kind of a stalemate vis-a-vis North Korea, do something, talk to them. And because we are strong enough, we are mature enough to deal with North Korea. So just do not remain just silent, do something, just coming out and make something out loud.
This has been the struggle, but just because South Korea hasn't been able to do it, doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. It is the challenge that every South Korean leader faces, and they only have 5 years. And so the next president, however liberal or conservative they are, my recommendation would be, you're the one. The thing that makes you different from the rest is you talk to Kim Jong-un. You get in the room with him. You don't tell him this, that, and the other thing. You start by listening. You start by understanding, figuring this guy out, figuring out where he wants to go with his country, both in security and economic terms, which is being ignored in terms of Kim Jong-un's economic ambitions. And so I do think there is an opportunity. There's been 2 inter-Korean summits. Even Lee Myung-bak talked about a third. Park Geun-hye talked about a third. The next Korean leader, I think that should be at the top of their inbox, that is the way to break the logjam, is to open the dialogue at the highest level. And that's also how you, as South Korea, finally have, there's a reason for Washington and Beijing to listen to you, because you are the channel now to the highest level with North Korea. So I do think that is the first, big challenge, and that would be the kind of bold, proactive step that you're talking about. I think what South Korea needs is, with this sort of bipartisan support, pragmatic, hard-nosed diplomacy, go to Pyongyang, go to Kim Jong-un, and start to take some leadership on making progress on this issue. And I do think if someone can make some headway with Kim Jong-un, Washington and Beijing will lead from behind on this, because it's a headache to both of them in different ways.
Even though we want to go to Pyongyang and talk to Kim Jong-un, North Korea, as long as they continue their nuclear and missile developments more serious, ramping up their security threats, South Korean, whether they are liberal or conservative, they will not in favor of that kind of idea. We have to remain quiet. We have to wait until they suspend all the kind of nuclear security threats. Otherwise, you should better not go there. So this is the general mood I feel in Korea. So theoretically, it's good. Any new president hopefuls or new president-elect, they might propose to North Korea. Then I want to go to North Korea. If you mind coming down to Seoul, I want to go there. But I don't know what kind of response or impression that will give to the general audience in South Korea, because the number one priority is to stop the North Korean threats, and then we consider. So this is exactly what happened for the last 4 or 5 years. The idea sounds pretty good, but we couldn't do it because many South Koreans are concerned about North Korean threat. So that's why they're talking about rearmaments with nuclear weapons, reintroduction of nuclear, U.S. tactical nuclear weapons. All kind of questions are not just from the conservatives. Many people in the middle, including some liberals, they argue that we have to do something to kind of stop North Korean threats.
I think this is exactly how the South Korean public is divided from Dr. Kim's side, there is that perspective. From John's side, there is that perspective. So it's a very difficult line, a fine line to tiptoe around in dealing with North Korea. We do need a very intelligent and smart tactic in dealing with North Korea and garnering support from the U.S., China, and related parties. I think this was a wonderful debate kind of talks. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Kim Chang-soo, for this, and John Delury, of course, thank you. And I'd like to thank you all for watching and staying with us. Of course, we'll be back next week, I promise you, because if it's midway through the week, it's Peninsula 24. And if you want to find out more about what's happening in and around the Korean Peninsula, it's Peninsula 24.